What's up, world's highest mind? Do you think of yourself as a smug asshole? Well, we should all consider it. I am your noocracy representative. What it means is I rule through intelligence rather than by popularity. It is a new government ran by logic and reason. The majority voted for it, so the democracy voted for a noocracy government instead. And the majority understands that the world is full of morons, and they think that the majority is morons, which I think is you have the biggest march in history, the Pink Hat March. What is it actually an icon for? Ignorance and our failure to understand basic rights in government. From the top down, presidents and governors have failed to understand our unalienable right to life. They've been shooting us with cops. They've been executing us. They have been having abortions, and the feminist gynocracy has run amok. What you have is a co-opting of words. Things like pro-choice. They disguise themselves as being the champions of liberty by saying pro-choice when failing to understand our unalienable right to life is actually terms for me starting a new government based on the Declaration of Independence, which I did so in 2014 on the West Coast in Cascadia. I was your president, now king of the continent, guys. I represent half the world. I command the world army. If someone was to take over in my stead, what would they have to understand? They would have to understand basic rights. They would have to understand our unalienable right to life, that all women have their baby at term, that cops can't blow your brains out, that presidents and governors cannot execute their people. They cannot have assassination programs to kill their own people when representing government. You see, this is just understanding the foundation of the U.S. government. They were supposed to understand for 2.5 centuries, that they failed to understand for 2.5 centuries. That is an idiocracy when the world is full of morons. It is a feminist gynocracy when the government is feminized to appeal to women and to coddle women to the point where they are violating our unalienable right to life, where Planned Parenthood pops its head out. That is a feminist gynocracy. So what we have today is a noocracy republic. I understand basic rights. I understand the foundation of the U.S. government when they have failed to. Okay? In my world, the world of the Zennial generation, the United States, Canada, and Mexico no longer exist. I am king of the continent. Cascadia has expanded from the Pacific Northwest, and I command the world army. If someone were to take over in my stead, if I were to pass away from COVID-19, which will never happen, you would have to understand basic rights. That nationalism is much like racism. It is something that we want to abolish. It is something that we get rid of. Nationalism itself is a stumbling block in the way of our progress as humanity. You would have to lead the world army. And this is something not any person can do. You have to be the one person that cannot be compromised by national agendas. The one person all nations can trust. The one person everyone can understand, that we all have our defensive posture, that no nation is allowed to run amok on the world stage any longer, not even the United States. No nation gets to police the world, that nationalism and national expansionism through violence is counterproductive and reminiscent of World War II, when Hitler tried to take over the world through violence. The world can only be conquered through inspiration and intellect. Knowledge is power, and with power comes great responsibility. If you have more power than anyone in world history, you have a tremendous amount of responsibility to be a good steward of the planet. A tremendous amount of responsibility to be better than your parents' generation before. And the mistake that they made was their territorialism, which I view as the root of all conflict. Our borders, our divides, our polarity, our different races, the things that we use to divide ourselves create polarity. Nationalism creates polarity, and polarity is something we cannot afford in a nuclear-powered world. This will lead to mutually assured destruction and Armageddon. Anyone who is an intellectual knows this, that the world is disorganized. I consolidate all leadership because of this, because anyone rational will come to this conclusion. All nations will come to the same conclusion that I have, eventually in their maturity. A person that cannot be compromised by corporate interests that only feed the corporation. I view corporations as monsters that only feed themselves. They are monsters that only feed themselves, and they care not about the environment. They care not about the people. They don't necessarily even care about their own employees. So a noocracy representative must understand how powerful corporations have become, how they are monsters in themselves, pretending to have the same rights as a human being. We have to understand that corporate conflicts could ensue as corporations are competitive with one another. And corporate violence is something we cannot afford. National violence is something we cannot afford. Conventional terrorism is something we cannot afford as a planet. And we have to be organized and transparent. Secrecy works against us as nations. Transparency is something we can all agree is important for our own prosperity as humankind. I think we are reaching to the stars as humanity now. I think that we have no interest in the petty squabbling of nations or the pundits on TV. We have gone outside the box and thought rationally. Our parents didn't understand about territorialism. They didn't understand Chief Seattle philosophy, that we all share the land, that nobody owns the continent. They wanted to sell their own children down the river as landlords instead. So it's important that we give our children a better future than we had, that we don't cannibalize our children when we are adulting in 2022. royalty is important. Why? Because the opposite of royalty is dehumanization and things like organ harvesting, where we turn a blind eye to certain people. So we need to look after one another. We are a family. The Cascadian Republic stands today. It stands better than any nation in history as we move beyond nationalism itself.